I'm Ben Rodway, and this is my Nomad.
So how did you get involved with Nomads? Because it wasn't a case of spotting the car and working out what it was. You specifically needed to find a Nomad.
That's right, Neil. I've been after a Nomad for, ever since I met my wife about 7 years ago. Her father was involved with the company in the 80s. Her brother's got one, her sister's got one. We didn't have one, so the search has been long and arduous. They're either too far away or too expensive. And then about 3 months ago, I found this car, which was actually a publicity car from 1986 that my wife's dad built in Scotland, 300 miles away, and I found it in my local town about 7 miles away for sale on eBay, would you believe?
It was meant to be.
It certainly was.
Now, you mentioned that your father-in-law was involved with Foers, but he's quite heavily involved. He's quite deeply involved. If you could tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so he, I think John Foers had been producing the Nomad for probably a few years, and then Angus got involved in the mid-80s. I think about 200 cars were made in total. And he then went on to work with John Foers on the Ibex, which is a very well-known vehicle as an alternative to a Land Rover. The places that thing can go is extraordinary. And he was a qualified consultant engineer, and he later went on to be involved with the Army Supercat project, and I believe they're still being manufactured to this day, the amphibious six-wheel drive utility vehicle.
To the uninitiated, and there will be a few, explain what the Nomad is.
It's a mini-based utility vehicle, so ideal for the golf course, the greenkeeper, farmers. My father-in-law used to tow a gang mower with one of his Nomads. It's mini-based, so it's got an A-series with up at the front in a mini subframe, 7.5-inch Cooper discs, mini subframe at the rear with drum brakes, a lot of the switchgear, all the interior, the dials, the wheels. Much of it is recognisable to many Mini owners.
beauty of the Nomad is it's, if you like, literally a miniature Land Rover, isn't it?
Pretty much, especially if you look at the roof. I'm told that to get the roof designed, they actually took a Land Rover roof, cut it down, took a mould from it, and the result is what you see there. But yeah, I mean, if you put knobblies on it, you can go pretty much anywhere in it, as long as you've got the ground clearance.
And from a practicality point of view, it's one of the kit cars that is, you know, sprung up in the 80s for the family man as well.
Very much so. Obviously this is the van version. It's got a 2-seat rear bench in the back, so you can actually get 4 in it, but it's only 2 pins to take the rear seat out. Then you've got at least a cubic metre of space in the back. There was also a pickup and a convertible version as well.
So take us back to the hunt for the car. You found the car, and a love story in a way, this restoration.
Well, I love and hate, Neil, like any car restoration. You know, it chose to fight back quite a few times. I've got to say that most of the work was done by my good friend Steve Bailey, without whom this car would not be here in this state right now. Yeah, we've done a pretty comprehensive top to bottom mechanical restoration. It's a bit shabby now, but it's got complete new braking system from master cylinder right through to new calipers and discs and flexes and hard lines and so on. Carb's been rebuilt. There was a partially melted loom hiding behind the dashboard, which has been addressed, and the list just goes on and on. We could be here forever if I detailed it all.
But the thing is that the beauty of this is that you can run it for years and years and years now and perfect it.
That's the hope, yeah. It would be nice at some stage to get the body off. There's a very clever chassis under there, which is made partly of C-section steel, a bit like a Triumph Herald, married up with box section as well. But obviously where you get a steel chassis and an aluminium body, and this will be familiar to pretty much any Land Rover owner, aluminium can corrode, and indeed, you know, this has in places. So yeah, a slightly more comprehensive bodywork restoration is probably next on the cards.
Now, the other beauty of this car is it's got a lovely nickname. Would you like to explain that?
Yes, well, the registration plate is Q77WAK. It's Quackers.
And this isn't your car, of course. You've borrowed the Mrs. car.
I have. She's been kind enough to lend it to us for the feature today. It was very much for Annie. So this was actually her Christmas present. An example of it fighting back. I was actually due to present it to her before Christmas, and on our way to the test centre, the master cylinder imploded, so back we had to go. So a reveal was done where she couldn't drive it. I'm pleased to say we've now got 12 months ticket on it with 2 very small advisories, which is pretty pleasing. And
so of her family, you said that hers is the last one. They've all got...
youngest brother doesn't have one yet, but perhaps that's something we're working on.
So, I usually ask this, but I think it's a silly question with this car because it's obvious this is going to be a loved family car, but what are the plans for the car going forward?
Well, as mentioned, we're going to have a look at the paint and the bodywork. I do have a 1275 engine sitting in a subframe, which I'm hoping that we can perhaps get in the next year or so. The Fow is all right, but we live in a pretty hilly area, as you can see, so a little bit more torque would not go unmissed.